Anger is one of those emotions that often disguises itself as power. In the heat of the moment, when our voice rises, when our words cut sharp, when our body trembles with intensity, we feel as if we are in control. But if we truly reflect, we will realize that anger is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of inner unrest. It is the mind admitting, without words, that it could not process reality in peace, so it chose an eruption instead. And here lies the first step in training the mind to never feel anger, recognizing its nature for what it truly is. Most people believe that anger comes from the outside, that someone insulted us, someone betrayed us, someone failed to meet our expectations, and therefore we became angry. But the truth is, anger is not born outside, it is created inside. The trigger may come from the world, but the fire is already within us. If there were no fire, no spark could ignite it. That is why two people can face the same insult, the same injustice, the same betrayal, and yet respond in completely different ways. One burns with fury while the other remains calm. The difference is not in the insult, it is in the inner state of the mind. Psychologists often describe anger as a secondary emotion. What this means is that beneath every outburst of anger lies something deeper: fear, pain, insecurity, disappointment. Anger is just the mask, and when you realize this, you begin to see anger not as an enemy to fight, but as a messenger telling you, there is something within you that needs attention. If you only fight the anger without listening to its message, you will silence the voice but never heal the wound. But if you pause and ask yourself, what is this anger trying to hide? What is it protecting me from? Then you start shifting from blindness to awareness. Philosophers through the ages have warned us against anger. Seneca, the great Stoic thinker, called anger a brief madness. Why? Because in those moments we lose reason, we lose balance, we lose the clarity to distinguish between what is important and what is trivial. Anger narrows the mind, it takes away perspective, and once perspective is lost, wisdom has no place to act. If you want to train your mind to never feel anger, you must first strip it of the illusion that anger makes you powerful. It does not, it makes you weak. True strength is calmness. True mastery is responding with clarity when chaos surrounds you. So when you recognize anger rising within, do not see it as proof of your authority. See it as proof of your vulnerability. This shift in perspective is powerful, because once you admit that anger is not a weapon but a weakness, your ego can no longer take pride in it. And without the ego's pride, anger starts losing its charm. The journey of mastering the mind begins not with suppression but with awareness. Do not push anger down, instead expose it, observe it, give it a name, tell yourself, this is not me, this is an emotion passing through me. The moment you learn to separate your identity from your emotion, you stop feeding it, you stop calling it my anger, and it becomes just the anger. This subtle shift creates distance, and distance gives you freedom. Remember this, anger is not strength, it is the absence of strength. It is not clarity, it is the absence of clarity. It is not control, it is the absence of control. And when you recognize this truth deeply, when you see anger not as your power, but as your prison, then your mind will begin to resist it, reject it, and eventually rise above it. Because no one ever grows by clinging to fire. They grow when they learn to let it go. If recognizing the true nature of anger is the first step, then the second step is learning how to detach yourself from the trigger. And this is where most of us struggle, because the human mind has been conditioned for centuries to react. Someone pushes us, we push back. Someone insults us, we retaliate. Someone raises their voice, we raise ours higher. It almost feels automatic, as though we have no choice, But the truth is we do have a choice. We simply have not trained ourselves to see it. Imagine this. You are walking down the street and someone suddenly shouts something unpleasant at you. Immediately, the body feels the surge. The heart races, the face heats up, the fists tighten. In that split second, the mind is presented with a fork in the road. One path is reaction, and the other is detachment. Most people take the first path without even realizing they had a second option. But the power to detach lies in the pause. That pause between the trigger and your response is the most powerful space you will ever own. When you pause, you are not suppressing your emotion, nor are you pretending it isn't there. You are simply stepping outside of the heat long enough to look at the situation with fresh eyes. The insult does not disappear, the betrayal does not vanish, but you no longer see it through the burning lens of immediate pain. Instead, you observe it with the clarity of distance. That is what detachment really means. Not indifference, but perspective. Detachment is misunderstood by many as coldness or lack of care. But it is not about caring less, it is about caring more wisely. To detach is to refuse to hand over your peace to every external circumstance. It is choosing not to let every word, every action, every opinion of others dictate the state of your heart. This is not weakness, it is mastery, because only a strong mind can stay calm while being provoked. When you learn detachment, you discover that most triggers are not as big as they seem in the moment. What felt like an unbearable insult in the heat of anger often shrinks into something trivial when viewed with calmness. This is because anger magnifies things. It makes mountains out of molehills. Detachment restores proportion. It reminds you that not every battle is worth fighting. Not every comment is worth answering, and not every provocation is worth your peace. Philosophy teaches us that the world is not in our control, only our response to it is. The Stoics called this the art of self-governance. Eastern traditions like Buddhism speak of it as non-attachment. Both point to the same truth: freedom does not come from controlling the world, it comes from controlling yourself. And that self-control begins by mastering the space between stimulus and response. Of course, detachment is not learned overnight. It takes practice. It means the next time someone criticizes you unfairly, you breathe before you reply. It means when someone tries to pull you into their chaos, you stand still instead of jumping in. It means when your ego screams to defend itself, you remind yourself that silence often speaks louder than words. Every time you choose detachment over reaction, you are strengthening a new habit in your mind, and over time, it becomes your natural way of being. So the next time anger rises, remember, you are not the fire, you are the space around it. If you can hold yourself in that space, even for a moment, the fire loses its grip. And in that simple act of detaching from the trigger, you reclaim the most powerful freedom. A human being can have the freedom to choose peace over provocation, because no one can control what the world gives you, but you can always control what you give back. When we have learned to recognize anger for what it really is, and when we have practiced stepping back from the immediate trigger, the next step is to reframe how we see the world. Because the truth is, much of our anger is not about what people do. It is about how we interpret what they do. The insult itself is only a collection of words, but the meaning we attach to it is what burns us. The delay, the betrayal, the disappointment, they carry the weight we assign to them. And that means if we can change our perception, we can change our emotional response. One of the most powerful ways to change perception is through empathy. Empathy does not mean excusing harmful behavior, but it does mean looking at others with the awareness that their actions are shaped by battles we cannot always see. When someone speaks with harshness, perhaps it is because they were never spoken to with kindness. When someone acts with cruelty, perhaps it is because their own heart is carrying wounds too heavy to bear. When someone fails us, maybe it is not because they intended harm, but because they themselves are broken in ways we cannot imagine. If you only see the surface, the insult, the action, the betrayal, you will meet it with anger. But if you look deeper, beyond the mask of behavior into the hidden struggle of another human being, then anger begins to soften into compassion. And compassion is a far more powerful energy than anger, because where anger destroys, compassion transforms. Think of the last time you were truly angry at someone. Ask yourself, did you stop to consider what they might have been going through? Most of us don't. We get so consumed by how their action affected us that we forget they are human too, with fears, scars, and stories. This is where reframing becomes essential. It allows us to step out of the narrow frame of me versus them and see the larger picture of shared humanity. Philosophically, empathy is the bridge that connects us beyond ego. Because anger is deeply tied to ego, it says, "How dare they do this to me?" But empathy says, maybe they acted this way because they are hurting. This shift dissolves the self-centeredness that fuels anger and opens the mind to understanding. And when you practice this shift again and again, something remarkable happens. You stop taking things personally. You realize that most of what people do is not about you. It is about them. Their harsh words reflect their own pain. Their impatience reflects their own restlessness, their betrayal reflects their own weakness, and suddenly, what once felt like a personal attack becomes a glimpse into another soul's struggle. That realization does not justify the behavior, but it liberates you from being chained to anger over it. Of course, empathy requires strength. It is far easier to lash out than to look deeper. It is far easier to condemn than to understand. But the harder path is the transformative one. Training your mind to replace anger with empathy is like building a new muscle. You must practice. You must exercise it in small moments until it becomes a part of who you are. And over time, your mind will stop defaulting to rage and will start defaulting to understanding. So, the next time someone provokes you, pause and ask, what pain might they be carrying that I cannot see? That one question has the power to dissolve the flames of anger into the light of compassion, because at the end of the day, the person who hurts you is not your enemy, they are your teacher. And when you learn to see through their pain instead of reacting to their actions, you free yourself from anger and rise into wisdom. Once we begin to recognize anger for what it truly is, and once we learn to step back from triggers and even reframe our perception through empathy, the journey takes us to something even deeper, the discipline of stillness, because a restless mind is like a storm constantly agitated, constantly seeking something to hold on to, and in such a storm anger easily takes root. But in stillness the storm subsides, and when the storm subsides, anger loses its soil, it has nowhere to grow. Stillness is not the absence of movement, nor is it the silence of doing nothing. Stillness is a state of inner clarity, where your mind is no longer at the mercy of every external push and pull. It is the ability to remain centered, even while the world around you spins in chaos, and that ability does not come by chance. It comes through discipline. Think of the moments in your life when you lost your temper. Did it happen in a calm state, or did it happen when your mind was already restless, already racing, already heavy with noise? Most often, anger is not a single spark. It is the final flame after countless small fires of worry, frustration, and tension have been left burning inside us. That is why cultivating stillness is essential, because when the inner fires are cooled, the sparks that come from the outside can no longer ignite them. Philosophers, mystics, and even modern scientists have agreed on one truth. The human mind cannot think clearly without periods of stillness. When you breathe deeply, when you sit in silence, when you slow down the constant chatter of thoughts, something powerful happens. You create space. And in that space there is perspective. In that space there is control. In that space anger has no foothold. Some people fear silence because silence forces us to face ourselves, but facing ourselves is the very medicine we need. Stillness reveals to us the patterns of our mind, the triggers we usually miss, the emotions we have buried. And once we see them clearly, they no longer control us unconsciously. Stillness brings them into the light, where we can meet them with awareness instead of being ruled by them in the dark. Training the mind in stillness is like strengthening a muscle. At first, it feels uncomfortable. The thoughts will rush in, the restlessness will resist, the ego will demand movement. But with practice, the mind learns to settle. The breaths become deeper, the noise softens, and the clarity expands. Slowly, you discover that stillness is not empty at all, it is full, full of strength, full of calm, full of wisdom. And once you build this discipline, you begin to carry it into daily life. A heated argument no longer shakes you the same way, because the silence you practice in solitude becomes the silence you hold in conflict. A harsh word no longer ignites your anger, because the space you create in stillness becomes the space between trigger and response. In this way, stillness is not something you practice only in quiet rooms. It becomes the very foundation of how you live. Remember this: anger thrives in noise, but dies in silence. If you can teach your mind to return to stillness even in the most difficult moments, then you have given yourself a shield stronger than any reaction. Because the truth is, peace is not found in the absence of problems. It is found in the presence of stillness. And when you master that presence, no anger can take it away. Once we learn to ground ourselves in stillness, something very important becomes possible. We begin to see that life is not simply a series of things happening to us. It is a series of choices we make in how we respond. And this is where the real transformation happens, shifting from reaction to purposeful response. A reaction is automatic. It comes without thought, like a reflex. Someone shouts, you shout back. Someone hurts you, you hurt them. Someone provokes you, you retaliate. It feels immediate, and in that immediacy, we often believe we are powerful. But if we look closely, a reaction is not power. It is the absence of power, because when we react, we hand over control of our inner world to the outer world. We allow someone else's behavior to dictate our behavior. And when you live in reaction, you are not leading your life. You are being led by circumstances. A response, on the other hand, is different. A response is deliberate. It is not born out of impulse, but out of awareness. It requires you to pause, to think, to choose, not from the heat of the moment, but from the clarity of intention. And in that choice lies strength, because when you respond purposefully, you are no longer a prisoner of anger. You are a master of your own mind. This is not just philosophy, it is neuroscience. Scientists tell us that the brain has pathways that can be rewired through repetition. Every time you choose to react in anger, you strengthen that pathway, making anger more automatic in the future. But every time you pause and replace reaction with response, you carve a new pathway. Over time, the brain learns this new habit. Calm becomes natural. Composure becomes instinctive. Peace becomes your default state, not anger. Think of it this way: each reaction is like adding a brick to the wall of anger, while each response is like laying a stone on the path of wisdom. The wall keeps you trapped, the path leads you forward. Which one you build depends entirely on the choices you make in those crucial moments. And here is where stillness, empathy, and awareness all come together. Stillness gives you the pause. Empathy gives you perspective. Awareness shows you the deeper truth. And with these tools, you are equipped to choose a purposeful response instead of a destructive reaction. Of course, this takes courage, it takes humility, because often the ego wants you to react. It whispers, defend yourself, prove them wrong, show them your strength. But true strength is not in proving the world wrong. It is in proving to yourself that you are bigger than your impulses. It is in proving that you can face fire without becoming fire. So the next time you feel anger rising, ask yourself, do I want to give my power away, or do I want to own it? Do I want to be a product of circumstance, or do I want to be the author of my response? That moment of questioning creates the space for choice, and that choice is everything. Because every reaction is a step backward into chaos, but every purposeful response is a step forward into freedom. And when you learn to choose freedom over fury, you are no longer at the mercy of anger. You are beyond it. If there is one thread that runs quietly beneath all anger, it is the ego. No matter how noble or justified we may believe our anger to be, at its core, anger is almost always about the ego being hurt. The ego craves recognition, it demands respect, it insists on control, and when any of these are threatened, anger comes rushing in to defend it. That is why even the smallest slight, the tiniest criticism, the briefest moment of disrespect can ignite such intense fury inside us. It is not our true self that is wounded, it is the fragile shell of the ego, and this is where the deepest training of the mind begins. Because you can practice stillness, you can pause before reacting, you can even empathize with others, but unless you learn to rise above ego, anger will always find a way back in. The ego thrives on comparison, on being right, on being superior, but the soul, your true self, needs none of that. The soul is content in its own light. It does not need to prove. It does not need to fight. It simply is. When you understand this, you start to see anger in its purest form, not as a protector, but as a prison. Every time you give in to anger, you are really serving your ego's need to dominate. But every time you rise above it, you free yourself from the chains of needing to win every argument, needing to control every outcome, needing to be validated by every voice. That is the essence of inner freedom. Philosophers and sages across cultures have reminded us that the greatest victory is not over others, but over oneself. And this victory comes when the ego no longer dictates your state of mind. Think of the strongest people you know. Are they the ones who shout the loudest, who always demand to be heard, who cannot tolerate disagreement? Or are they the ones who carry quiet confidence, who need no approval to stand tall, who remain composed even in the face of insult? Real strength does not shout. It radiates, it does not defend. It understands, it does not break down in anger. It rises in dignity. When you let go of ego, you also let go of the very fuel that feeds anger. Suddenly, criticism no longer stings in the same way, because you no longer see yourself as defined by the opinions of others. Disrespect loses its edge because your worth is not up for negotiation. Even betrayal, though painful, no longer destroys you because your center of gravity lies deeper than external validation. In rising above ego, you step into a state of freedom that anger can never touch. But let us be clear, this is not easy. The ego is subtle, persistent, and deeply woven into how we live. It whispers in moments of silence, it hides behind pride, it disguises itself as strength. To rise above it requires awareness, humility, and constant practice. But each time you resist the pull of ego, each time you choose peace over pride, you are chipping away at anger's foundation. And eventually, the structure collapses. So if you truly want to train your mind to never feel anger, look beyond the surface practices and go to the root. Recognize that the battle is not with the world outside. It is with the ego inside. The moment you stop feeding it, the moment you let go of its demands, you will find a freedom that no insult, no betrayal, no injustice can take away from you. Because in the end, anger belongs to the ego, but peace belongs to the soul. And when you choose the soul, you are choosing a life no longer bound by reaction, but liberated by wisdom. And that is the ultimate victory, not conquering others, but conquering yourself.